Tony's bar still gave me the horrors. One day it was raining very hard, and I was on my way to Tony's about a half-hour late. Ray, the young Italian hipster, stuck his head out of the door of a restaurant and called me over. It was a lunch counter with booths along one wall. We sat down at a booth, and I ordered tea. "There's an agent outside in a white trench coat," Ray told me. "He followed me over here from Tony's, and I'm afraid to go out." I drank my cup of tea, thanked him for the information, and left ahead of him. I had the stuff in a package of cigarettes and was ready to throw it in the water-filled gutter. Sure enough, there was a burly young man in a white trench coat standing in a doorway. When he saw me, he started sauntering up the street ahead of me. Then he turned a corner, waiting for me to walk past so he could fall in behind. I turned and ran back in the opposite direction. When I reached 6th Avenue, he was about 50 feet behind me. I vaulted the subway turnstile and shoved the cigarette package into the space at the side of a gum machine. I ran down one level and got a train up to the square. After that, things got worse and worse. One day, the hotel clerk stopped me in the lobby. "I don't know how to say this," he said, "but there's something wrong about the people who come up to your room. I used to be in illegitimate business myself years ago. I just wanted to warn you to be careful and tell these people to watch what they say." I could feel the pedals moving steadily closer. It was a question of time. I did not trust any of the village customers, and I was convinced that at least one of them was a rank stool pigeon. Dewey was my number one suspect, with Nick running a very close second. Narcotics agents operate largely with the aid of informers. The usual routine is to grab someone with junk on him and let him stew in jail until he is good and sick. Then comes the spiel. "We can get you 5 years for possession. On the other hand, you can walk out of here right now. The decision is up to you. If you work with us, we can give you a good deal. For one thing, you'll have plenty of junk and pocket money. That is, if you deliver. Take a few minutes to think it over." The agent takes out a few caps and puts them on the table. "This is like pouring a glass of ice water in front of a man dying of thirst. Why don't you pick them up? Now you're being sensible. The first man we want to get is..." Some of them don't need to be pressured. Junk and pocket money is all they want, and they don't care how they get it. Sooner or later, the peddlers get wise to a pigeon, and the pigeon can't score. Where this happens, his usefulness to the agents is at an end, and they usually turn him in. Often he ends up doing more time than anybody he sent up. After the hotel clerk spoke to me, I moved to another hotel and registered under another name. I stopped going to the village and shifted all the village customers to uptown meets. When I told Gaines what the hotel clerk said to me and how lucky we were he happened to be a right guy, he said, "We've got to pack in. We can't last with this crowd." So Bill left for Lexington, and I started for Texas in my car. I had 1/16 ounce of junk with me. I figured this was enough to taper off, and I had a reduction schedule carefully worked out. It was supposed to take 12 days. I had the junk in solution and in another bottle distilled water. Every time I took a dropper of solution out to use it, I put the same amount of distilled water in the junk solution bottle. Eventually, I would be shooting plain water. 4 days later in Cincinnati, I was out of junk and immobilized. I have never known one of these self-administered reduction cures to work. You find reasons to make each shot an exception that calls for a little extra junk. Finally, the junk is all gone and you still have your habit. I left the car in storage and took a train to Lexington. I did not have the papers that are required for admittance, but I was relying on my Army discharge to get me in. When I got to Lexington, I took a taxi out to the hospital, several miles from the town. We reached the gatehouse of the hospital. In the gatehouse was an old Irish guard. He looked at my Army discharge. "Are you addicted to the use of habit-forming drugs?" I said yes. "Well, sit down." He pointed to a bench. "You ever been here before?" he asked. I said no. "Have you got any drugs or needles or droppers on your person? You can surrender them here, but if you take them up to the main building, you are liable to prosecution for introducing contraband articles into a government reservation." "I've got nothing." The guard took me to my ward. "If you want to get off drugs," he said, "this is the place to do it." The ward attendant asked me if I really wanted to get off drugs. I said yes. He assigned me to a private room. About 15 minutes later, the attendant called, "Shot line." Everyone in the ward lined up. As our names were called, we put an arm through a window in the door of the ward dispensary, and the attendant gave the shots. Sick as I was, the shot fixed me. Right away, I began to get hungry. There were 3 shots a day, one at 7 a.m. when we got up, one at 1 p.m., and one at 9 p.m. 2 old acquaintances had come in during the afternoon, Matty and Lewis. I ran into Lewis as we were lining up for the evening shot. "Did they get you?" he asked me. "No, just here for the cure. How about you?" "Same with me," he answered. With the evening shot, they gave me some Coral Hydrate in a glass. 5 new arrivals were brought to the ward during the night. The ward attendant threw up his hands. "I don't know where I'm going to put them. I've got 31 dope fiends in here now." Among the new arrivals was a dignified, white-haired man of 70 named Bob Riordan, an old-time con man, junk pusher, and pickpocket. He looked the way bankers looked around 1910. He had come with 2 friends in a car. On the way to Lexington, they had called the Surgeon General in Washington and asked him to wire ahead to the gate that they were coming and should be let right in. They referred to the Surgeon General as Felix and seemed to know him from way back. Only Riordan got in that night. The other 2 drove to a town near Lexington where they knew a croaker to get fixed before they were immobilized for lack of junk. The cure at Lexington is not designed to keep the addicts comfortable. It starts at 1/4 of a grain of morphine, 3 times a day and lasts 8 days. The preparation now used is a synthetic morphine called dolafine. After 8 days, you get a send-off shot and go over in population. There you receive barbiturates for 3 nights, and this is the end of medication. For a man with a heavy habit, this is a very rough schedule. I was lucky in that I came in sick, so the amount given in the cure was sufficient to fix me. The sicker you are, and the longer you have been without junk, the smaller the amount necessary to fix you. When the time came for my send-off shot, I was assigned to Ward B, Skid Row it was called. There was nothing wrong with the accommodations, but the inmates were a sorry-looking lot. In my section, there were a bunch of old bums with the spit running out of their mouths. You're allowed 7 days to rest in population after medication stops. You don't kick your habit in the shooting gallery, an inmate told me. You kick it over here in population. The night medication stopped, I checked out still sick. On a cold, windy afternoon, 5 of us took a cab into Lexington. Eventually I got to Texas and stayed off junk for about 4 months. Then I went to New Orleans. New Orleans presents a stratified series of ruins. Along Bourbon Street are ruins of the 1920s. Down where the French Quarter blends into Skid Row are ruins of an earlier stratum. Chilly joints, decaying hotels, old-time saloons with mahogany bars, spittoons and crystal chandeliers, the ruins of 1900. There are people in New Orleans who have never been outside the city limits. The New Orleans accent is exactly similar to the accent of Brooklyn. The French Quarter is always crowded. Tourists, servicemen, merchant seamen, gamblers, perverts, drifters, and lambsters from every state in the Union. People wander around, unrelated, purposeless, most of them looking vaguely sullen and hostile. This is a place where you enjoy yourself. Even the criminals have come here to cool off and relax. But a complex pattern of tensions, like the electrical mazes devised by psychologists to unhinge the nervous systems of white rats and guinea pigs, keeps the unhappy pleasure seekers in a condition of unconsummated alertness. For one thing, New Orleans is inordinately noisy. The drivers orient themselves largely by the use of their horns, like bats. The residents are surly. The transient population is completely miscellaneous and unrelated, so that you never know what sort of behavior to expect from anybody. New Orleans was a strange town to me, and I had no way of making a junk connection. Walking around the city, I spotted several junk neighborhoods. St. Charles and Poydras, the area around and above Lee Circle, Canal and Exchange Place. I don't spot junk neighborhoods by the way they look, but by the feel, somewhat the same process by which a dowser locates hidden water. I'm walking along, and suddenly the junk in my cells, moves and twitches like the dowser's wand. Junk here. I didn't see anybody around, and besides, I wanted to stay off. Or at least I thought I wanted to stay off.